and taking flight. Of visions coming alive. 3D scenes in motion where our transports thrive. Diverging diamonds below. Urban dreams in sight. Engineering the future with every line we write. Urban maps the line. Visions we...
Civil Engine's 3D asset library boasts over 1,000 assets, including city furniture, trees, vegetation, construction items, decals, and more. With customizable dynamic assets like animated construction equipment and traffic signals, users can enhance visualizations with realistic, context-specific details, transforming designs into vibrant, interactive environments. Place, scale, rotate, organize, and customize hundreds of assets to add realism to your scenes. Let's get started. All right, welcome to this video on 3D assets within Civil Engine. We're going to get started by showing how there are a few different types of assets that you're going to encounter. You can access the asset library by clicking on this palm tree icon up here in the top right, and you'll see we've got library assets, dynamic assets, and expansion packs, which won't be part of this tutorial. And then there's a third type of asset called an imported asset. So I'm going to place one of each just to show the difference, and then we'll dive deeper into other aspects, including the different categories. So let's place one of the library assets. Let's choose a rock. Now let's place one of the dynamic assets. Choose a box. And then I've already preloaded an imported asset, which is a cube. And this is the same cube we used in the import portion of this tutorial series. So you'll see here, we've got 3 objects now in 3D space. In some aspects, they're going to behave similarly, and in some aspects, they're going to be a little different. If you go to the hierarchy and go to the asset portion, you'll see all 3 of these assets are showing up. They're named a little bit differently. So every time you place something, it's going to have a different identifier. So this rock 2 has 13, this box is 14, this square is 15. That's just to help differentiate similar assets from each other. But then you can also see this box has the dynamic tag, and the dynamic assets you place should have that. And then the square says square.obj, which was the file name that it pulled when it imported that object. So they all do different things, but they're all showing up here in the asset portion of the hierarchy. So when you click on them, you'll notice the detail panel pulls up on the left, and each of these they're all going to have the same options. And essentially, this is where you can rotate, scale, or move the asset in addition to the transform gizmo here in 3D space. So we can do it by clicking and rotating here on any of these, or we can do that over here on the left, which will achieve the same sorts of rotation. You can also reset them, and you can do the same thing with the import. So those are the 3 different types of assets we're going to cover in this tutorial series. Now we're going to dive deeper into static assets. While the static assets are going to behave similarly one to another, there are some subtle differences I want to point out. There are some static assets that have a set in brackets. So for example, this building is a building set. When you see that, it means it's a set of assets, and as you click them, it's going to randomly place one of several different types. So you can see here, I keep clicking, but if a different one shows up. So these first few in the buildings category are going to differentiate a little bit from each other, just like this. And also these generic buildings, these are going to be the same 40 by 40, but they're going to have different heights. And then the same thing with the large 80 by 80 with different heights. And then there are a few other sets that you'll encounter, and I'm not going to cover all of them, but for example, if we go to pedestrians and bikes, you'll see here I have standing adult set. So every time we click, it's going to place a different 3D model. It's going to randomize them. All right, the other thing to point out is that some of the static assets, even though we call them static, some of them do have some subtle animations. You can see here these people have some slight animations. Also, if you place some of the nature elements like trees, you're going to see that they animate slightly. And then there are just a few more specialty assets if you go to energy, like windmills, that have their own animation. And for the final special type of static asset, I open this new scene because you can only really see how these work if you have a base model to place them on. And that's the decal category. So if you try and place these in an empty scene, nothing will happen. But if you try and place them on a base model, then they're kind of like stickers and they need something to stick to. So we have things like potholes and cracks, and then also things like manholes and grates. And this is a little bit buggy, but sometimes it won't be full resolution by default, but if you zoom in and zoom back out for whatever reason, that seems to work. So these are, again, they need something to be placed on. And so once you place them, you're generally just going to want to move them in the X and Y axis, not on the Z axis. So feel free to play around with those decals, again, which are kind of a special category within the static assets. When you go to place a 3D asset, it's going to try to track a surface as long as that surface was imported with the base model. So if we want to bring in this palm tree, you'll see here, it's trying to track the surface of this base model, and when you click to place, it's going to place it wherever it was on that scene. And as we discussed in the import video, if you place an imported asset as just an asset and not a base model, those 3D objects are not going to track for placement. So for the square, this is just going right through that, trying to track the base model. All right, so now we're going to dig deeper into the asset categories, and to do so, we're going to use this empty slabs example project, and I'm just going to turn off some of the other ones that we're not going to be using so that we can focus right here on this concrete slab for our placement. The goal of this tutorial is not going to be to do a comprehensive overview of every single asset. Again, we have over 1,000 in our library when you combine static and dynamic assets, but I am going to try and give an idea of the different categories and what you can expect to find within them. So we'll start here with barriers, and a lot of these are actually going to be more useful in the context of a path, but we do have them all as standard assets as well in case you want to place them manually one by one in your scene. Some of them, like the sand barrel or the bollard, will be more useful in a lot of the scenes that you're working with. The next category is buildings, and we already talked about how some of these are their own special category called sets, but we also do have a number of other buildings that you can use, and these are fairly generic, but they are sometimes useful if you're trying to communicate a certain thing. And so feel free to look at these more in detail. Some of these residential or commercial buildings I think are especially useful because they can kind of replace more generic type buildings that are commonly found in urban contexts. So again, take a look at all of these different buildings when you're looking through the asset library yourself. All right, the next asset category is construction, and there are a number of useful assets here, either on their own or as part of the path tool. And again, if you want to place something as a path, you can simply click the Create Path button, and we'll cover that more in detail in the path tool, but you can see how useful that is to place those different objects. We also have a few signs. You'll find that we have a lot more signs in some other categories, including dynamic assets. And then we also have a few construction equipment, construction vehicle assets, but you'll also notice that we have animated versions of these. And so just make sure and understand this before you use one, because there might be a better option in the dynamic asset category. Something like this Bobcat, we don't have an animated version, and so you'll want to stick to the static version. We also have a pile of rubble, and we have a few construction workers that can be placed in your scene. The next category is called end treatments, and by the time you're watching this, we should have added more. We have plans to add many more end treatments here, and we're hoping that these will be most useful if you want to add an end treatment to a jersey barrier or a guardrail. So let's say that we add a piece of jersey barrier here, and then that's not usually how it is in the real world. You want to have an end treatment, and so here you can click the end treatment, and then you can click towards the end, and then it's just a matter of selecting and rotating that asset to get it to fit correctly on your path. And you can also scale that to make sure that it fits a little bit more tightly. And so get an understanding of what end treatments are available so that you can get the correct look for the ends of your types of jersey barrier and guardrail. The next category is energy, and we're proud to offer these options because we know that a lot of infrastructure projects involve energy. So we have this very large windmill. We've got a couple smaller versions, and all of them are animated. We've also got a number of transmission towers that you can place in your scene, and then we've got a number of solar panels as well. So this is for your convenience for those either energy specific or energy adjacent infrastructure projects. All right, I've switched to a soil platform to check out the next group of categories, which are all the nature group. So these are all alphabetized, and we start with cacti. There are a number of different options for cacti, and these are going to be great for your more desert scenes. And one thing just to note about these is, in general, they're not going to have animation because cactuses really don't move that much in the wind. But there are a lot of choices to choose from here, in addition to some of our shrubs and grass that are also great for your desert scenes. Moving along, we'll go to flowers. There are a lot of choices here, and again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but we've tried to add enough variety that you can make sure that you can get the correct landscape or something similar to it for your own projects. And some of these are animated and some of them are not, but we do have a number of really beautiful flower styles. If there are more you're looking for, make sure to reach out to us on the contact us form, and we might be able to include it for this category or any other asset category in future versions. And then, as I'll show in a little bit, you can also import your own 3D models as long as it's an FBX or an OBJ, as long as it doesn't need to have animation. The next category is grass, and you'll see we've got a number of different options here as well, some of them animated, some of them not. And we've also got some kind of square-shaped versions. A lot of these, they can be placed in using the area system, so you can create an area using points like this, but I would recommend in most cases to use the area presets for grass, as you're going to have a lot more control over how those are placed and their optimization if you use that system. All right, the next nature category is rocks, and we've got rock groups, we've got large rocks, we've got small rocks, we've got giant rocks, we've got red deserty rocks, and hopefully you can find the rock that you're looking for in our library. The next group is shrubs, and we're starting to get into some categories that have dozens, if not over 100 different assets, and so make sure to familiarize yourself with what's available here so that when you're doing your own projects, you can quickly reference and pull from this asset library. And so we've tried to cover a lot of different types so that not just the desert where I'm coming from, but those in more tropical environments or mountainous environments with pines, that you'll be able to find something similar to the type of vegetation that you're looking for. All right, and then finally we have trees, and I believe we have over 100 different trees. They're sorted by the different types, so you'll see here we've got a bunch of different beech trees, And then you'll go down lower and we've got some alder trees, and then we've got birch trees, and then we've got maple trees, and then we've got oak trees, and then we've got some poplar trees. And some of these you'll see they come in kind of spring, winter, fall varieties. So check out the variety that we have there. And then you'll see we've got some more pine trees, some conifers, and there are a few different styles here. And then scrolling further down towards the bottom, we've got our tropical trees, which include some beautiful palm trees. And then down here at the very bottom, we've got some kind of low poly trees. If you're either interested in that look or you're more worried about optimization. And included at the very bottom, we've got some low poly trees, which are kind of cool for a low poly look. And when I mean poly, when I say poly, I mean polygon. And then we've got a few cherry blossom type trees. So before I move on to other categories, I do want to just reinforce the hierarchy and how it can be used to organize your assets. So if we wanted to take all these assets, we can right click and wrap with folder, and then we can rename Cacti. And once that's done, then we could turn them all on and off. We could delete them, or more commonly, I like to lock them so that those selector icons don't just keep showing up, which can be very distracting. So we can do the same thing for the flowers and the grass. And finally, the trees. So it's up to you how you use the hierarchy and how organized you want to be, but you'll find it to be very useful if you can keep the assets as organized as possible, if nothing else to lock them so that those selector icons turn off. And then also when you have big groups of trees or grass, it's really useful to turn them off while you're working, just to make sure your performance doesn't drop and slow down your work in Civil Engine. All right, continuing our journey through the different library asset categories. We are now in the other category, and this is just a hodgepodge of 3D assets that didn't fit anywhere else. This water cube can be very handy to add water to your scene. You might want to scale it up like I just did there, maybe to 100, and then you can place it where you need to. This is in addition to being able to place water using the pass system or the area system, but this is one of the nice options. We've also got some emissive lights here that can be more useful if you're doing something at dusk or at night. We also have dynamic versions of those that I'll go over in a second. We've got various types of detectable warning strips. We've also got a number of curb median pieces that you can to communicate urban type projects. We've got an empty pipe. We've got some pipe fittings. We've got manhole cross section. This one's got the pivot point so that it'll be placed underground. We've got a manhole without the cross section. Again, same idea. And again, some more sidewalk pieces that you can use in conjunction with each other to assemble various sidewalk elements if they aren't part of your base model. Our next category is pavement markings, and these are just a number of useful, commonly used pavement markings that you can click and place on your base model. These also don't have shadows applied to them, which is really nice. They don't look like they're floating above your base model if they're not quite flush. And you can place these one by one like I'm doing here, or you can place them as part of a path, either here in the asset library, or we've got a number of these as presets. But once you place them as paths, again, we'll cover this more in detail in the past video, but you can adjust the spacing and the scaling and the offset. As you scroll further down, you'll notice we've got reflector domes and other kinds of reflectors, and then we've got various colors for some of these pavement markings that are used in green or yellow. So again, feel free to check all these out. These are for your convenience. If there are other types of pavement markings that we don't have in our library, you can always import them as an imported asset. The next category is pedestrians and bikes. We talked about how several of these are sets, just like the buildings, where you click them and you'll get different randomization each time you click them. But we also have some others like cyclists, and we've got scooter riders. These are not sets, but these are really useful to be placed in your scene. And then we've got some more ADA type options here as well, including individuals in wheelchairs of various types, and blind with cane, crutches, and walker. And these are elements that we hope to add to our traffic system eventually, but for now you can place them as static assets. The next category is signs and signals, and we start out with a number of different types of delineators, and then we've got some commonly used signs like this U-turn or stop sign. And if you get further down, we've got some signs like RFBs, and we have two versions. We have a type that is off, and then we have a type where that's on. And let me change the time of day so we can better see this. But I guess these kind of go in the category of special because they are slightly animated. If you have a custom RFB that you want to import or you need to configure yourself, we've got these flashers that you can place in your scene and position and scale so that they'll fit onto whatever the type of flasher that you have. We've also got round ones in addition to the rectangle one. And if those selector icons, again, if they ever get in the way, you can always hide them by locking the asset or putting it into a folder that is already locked. And we've got two different types of each of these rectangle and circle flashers, and that is so that if you want them to be alternating, you can have that functionality. Scrolling further down, we've got a number of different types of traffic signal lights, and these are just the lights. And this is so that you can customize very specific types. Maybe you've got a imported model and you want to make sure that it's displaying the right thing, then you can choose and you can assemble that piece by piece using these static assets. We've got green, red, and yellow, both in the dotted and the solid configurations. And we've also got green arrows as well. And I'll show you in the dynamic assets in just a minute how we have more customization there. And then down at the very bottom, we've got several different types of mast arms so that you can assemble from these pieces your own types of signs or flashers. And then we've got a billboard here as well. So a lot of different options in these signs and signals static category, and then we'll have many more in the dynamic. The next category is street furniture, and these are things like light poles and bus stops and city benches. And so these can be used to quickly populate these sorts of common urban elements into your scene. And again, you can always import your own if we don't have it, but just take a look and see the types of different assets we have here, including a utility cabinet and benches and bus stops. We also have different types of bike racks, including an electric type bike rack. We've got some table and chair configurations. We've got some garbage cans. We've got a meter. We've got several different plant pots. We've got some tree grates, and then some mailboxes. The next category is traffic calming, and these are for like median islands or curb bump outs. Honestly, most of these elements should be part of your base model, but if they're not, you can supplement your base model using some of these elements, including these speed bumps. So these are just more options to continue to build out your base models. And then our last category is vehicles. We start out with a vehicle set. We've also got a pickup truck. And then we've got some things like an ambulance, city bus, fire truck, school bus. We've got several different types of airplanes. and a few boats, and that's vehicles. And that wraps up the static portion of our library assets. Next, we're going to move on to the dynamic assets. All right, so dynamic assets are incredibly useful, and they work differently than the static assets that we just went over. And the way they work differently is that they have customization options. And they also work differently because you can't just drag them from their thumbnail and place them like you do with static assets. You have to first create a template, and then the template is what you place into your scene. So let's use this sphere as an example. So I'm going to take this sphere. So I click the plus button to put it into the template list, and now I drag from there to place it into the scene. So now we've got this sphere. We've got the same customization options over here in the detail panel. Let's make it 5 times bigger, and let's bring it up. But then you'll see this edit parameters, and this also shows up in the scene, although you're going to probably find it's going to be more stable doing the edit parameters over here in the right panel. Either way, it's the exact same options. They are redundant. So once you click that, you're going to see different options depending on what the dynamic asset is. So for this one, you can see the default is 1 foot. We could also go 1 meter. And so since we already scaled it, it's just going to scale it whatever the ratio between 1 foot and 1 meter cubed is. You'll notice also we can adjust the texture. So let's change this to glowing, and then let's change it to something that we can see very visibly. So now we got this glowing sphere. So if we place another version, it's going to have all of the same parameters from here, from the template panel, but it's not going to have the same parameters here from the details panel. That is unique per instance, whereas these templates are going to be consistent across all instances. So if I place a few more of these spheres, you'll see here we've got a number of these, and now if I want to change the color, it's going to change all of those together. Or if maybe I wanted to change it to a plastic or a stylized, shiny stylized. So now we got these shiny balls, and they're going to take on the characteristics and be consistent across them. If I place another one, it's going to show up. But if I go ahead, so we can stop editing assets to close that panel, if I add another template, you'll see here now I've got sphere dynamic with a randomized 4-digit code, 6988, and then I've got 3040. So when we select these, you can see here this one's 6988, but if I place 3040, that's a completely different template. And so these, you may think that these are the same spheres, but they're not. They're completely different, and they're only going to be adjusted when the parameters of that template is adjusted. So hopefully that makes sense on how dynamic assets work and how they're different from static assets. And again, they will show up in the hierarchy the same as other assets, both static and imported, but you're going to see this dynamic tag for each of them. You'll also see a unique identifier for each instance, so 96, 97, 98, but then you'll see that that code 6988 is part of the file name as well. All right, so we'll go through these different categories the same way we did with the static assets, but this will take a little longer because each of these are going to have their own types of customization. I already showed the sphere in the building blocks. These can be useful for things like maybe we want to do a curb and gutter, then we can create that dynamic asset. We can use the path tool, and now we can put it along there and then adjust the spacing to get our own specialized type of curb and gutter. And then because it's a dynamic asset, and this is something we'll go over again in the paths video, but we could control this to be whatever we wanted it to be, and then it's a path, which is something dynamic that we can adjust. And there are a number of these other assets that can be used to just augment your base model and build out your scene. And each of those, the only parameters to edit are the material type and then the color. The next category is construction. We've got 8 different versions here, including a roller, a backhoe, a concrete truck, a crane, an excavator, a blade, a dump truck, and a loader. And so we can place these one by one in our scene to show the different parameters that we have here. This is something that you'll be able to check out yourself when you're playing around with Civil Engine. This one says cement truck. I'm going to fix that just because that's not what we call it in the industry. As you can see here, we've got these 8 different types of construction vehicles. By default, they're in their static pose, but you can adjust each of these by clicking that Edit Parameters button, and then you're going to have a number of different options. Again, these options are going to be different depending on what the dynamic asset is. So for these, the biggest one is going to be the animation selection. So you can see here, I just selected this forward animation. You can also adjust the operator. We've got 2 different types. So if I go back to roller, I can select operator A or B. I can also adjust the animation speed from 1 to 5. Let's slow it back down. And then I can also do things like exhaust and dust. And while these may not communicate the environmentally friendly nature of your projects, they are pretty cool. So that option is available. You can also adjust the animation start position just for more control, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. I'm not going to go through all of these, but they all kind of perform the same, which is we can select from which animation we want to use. We can turn it on play or off, which allows us to adjust the animation start position. If we want to hold something specific, you can do that. And again, because this is an instance of this template, if I took this excavator again, it's going to come out with that same animation, all the other parameters that we customized. But if I want a different one with a different animation, I'm going to need to make another template, and then that one I can edit independently from the other instance. And again, we can see the difference between that number 3412 and 374. All right, for the most part, the other ones have the same sorts of assets, which is selecting the animation, the operator, dust, exhaust, and so on. I want to show this crane one. Shout out to Johnny for help on this one. But this has a few other added features. So we can select the animation. So if we do lift only, you can see here it extended. It's lowering the hook. But then on this one, we can also add which attachment. So maybe we want to do a beam because we're building a bridge, or we want to do a pipe because we're laying pipe, or we want to do a rebar cage because we are doing a drilled shaft. So this one has the same sorts of parameters as the other ones, just with those added attachments to add a little bit more detail and life to your scene. All right, the next category is emissive lights. For this one, I will turn down our sun a little bit. We've got 2 types. We've got cone and point, and each of them have their own parameters to edit. So cone light might be best for something like a street light, and once you place it, you can edit it in real time, so we can adjust the light distance, which is how far that light is going to extend. You can also adjust the cone angle and then the brightness. For the point light, we've got just brightness. And in the past video, I'll show how you can use these emissive lights in conjunction with actual 3D light models with the path tool to do some pretty cool night lighting. All right, the next category is labels and graphics. We will be adding to this, but for now, we just have custom label and a point of interest arrow. So once you create these, we'll place them so that you can see what customizations are available. So this label should be used pretty consistently, and this one, obviously you can change the text, so we can change this to civil engine, and then we've got the body text, so we can say created by Beyond CAD Inc. And then you have a number of other parameters like font type, font size, and then also the color both of the font and of the label itself. And then as a note, the details panel, you can always scale something, but that's independent of what other customization options you have for this individual template. So if you change the header text size to 40, that's going to be independent of just going ahead and scaling that entire thing by 2. The point of interest arrow is something to draw attention to various parts of your project. If you go to the parameters that you can edit there, we've got a few different types of arrows. Let's first change the type of texture that we have here. So let's go to just stylized. We can change the color, and then we've got a few different types of arrows. So these you can scale and use to kind of point down to various parts of your project. And kind of a pro tip, check out these different stylized materials. They're going to be super useful to do different things. So like this one, you can see it's kind of translucent if you don't want it to block something. And we've got this other one that's kind of translucent. So just check out all these different stylized materials to get the correct look that you're going for. Some of these also cast shadows and some of them do not. So check all of those out. All right, the next category is mast arms. And I'll add all these as their own templates, place them and show the various customizations. So this one you'll see here, this is something that you might see in a standard US city, which is fine, but with this one we have the ability to customize things like the arm scale, in and out, the arm height, so that's where it's placed on the pole, and then the height scale. So this is just a really nice way of quickly building out your signal mast arms. And if you have one type that you're going to use a lot, it's nice to customize it. So let's place a few of these, and they will all change together because they're multiple instances of the same template. One note on these, I'm going to show some traffic signals in just a second. They can't be placed on there because these are not base models, and so it's a little frustrating, but you do have to go to signals. Let's create a template here, getting ahead of ourselves. We can't place it on that arm, it's placing it out in the distance, so you got to place it underneath, and then you've got to lift it up, which is a pain, but just something to note. All right, we've got a few other types of signal mast arms, and each of them just has different parameters that you can customize. So most of these, I mean, obviously all signal arms are going to be a little bit different depending on the intersection, and so this just gives you the ability to go out and make changes to it. So this one, the arm length, there are those different segments, so you can go to 1, 2, or 3, and then you can also adjust the different colors of the different elements. And then these green ones back here, similarly, we can adjust the arm length and the color. All right, the next category right now, it's other. We'll get that fixed to be named as animals because we do have a number of different types of animals here. We've got forest animals and we've got farm animals. So without going into depth on all of those, you'll just be able to see that we've got a number of different types of animals, and then each of them has their own animations. So we could change this to a deer stag, and then we've got a number of animations for that. And some of them, when they move in place. And just like the construction equipment rollers, the selection icon is going to be the same no matter what's going on with that dynamic asset moving around. You can also pause the animation if you want. So feel free to play around with those. Those are really fun, especially if you're doing something that's maybe farmland adjacent or something with animals that might be crossing the path. So if we go to farm animals, you can see here we could do something like a cow that is definitely adjacent to a lot of projects. The next category is pedestrians. And in the future, we'll have a third type called metahuman. That's not currently here. But we can create a template of both of these, both a simple pedestrian and a low poly pedestrian. So if I place a simple pedestrian, we're going to have a number of options here. And this actually might be one of the most useful dynamic assets we have, because we have over 60 different people that you can select from. So they just have different numbers. You'll have to zoom through and find which ones you like. You could play the animation. You can also pause the animation and select the initial position. And then you can choose from a number of animations. And just as a note, some of these we're still working on, and so they may not have the props, but for the most part, these are either doing something static without a prop, so maybe they're sitting and talking to someone, or some of them actually have a prop. Like if they're digging, they're going to have a shovel, and if they're using a tripod for a survey, then there will be a tripod. But again, this one's not fully fleshed out. So just take note of which ones of these they may or may not be fully finished, depending on when you're watching this video. This one's drone launch, but there's not a drone there. There is kind of a controller. It says drone flying. We've also got things like note taking in various forms. We've got reading blueprints. We've got presenting. And then the further you get along in the person, we go from male to female. And then we have various types of construction or emergency personnel. So maybe we wanted to use this individual right here, and we wanted to do something like taking notes or taking photos as part of an inspection. Then you can do that. Or maybe we're presenting to a group of other workers, or we are discussing with other. So maybe we want to, let's add another simple pedestrian, because again, if we add the first one, he's going to be doing the exact same thing. So if we want to add multiple, then we've got to make another template, and we've got to adjust this one to be doing some sort of animation that goes along with the first. So we could do this, and we could say one of the other discussing animations. We also have some more construction types, like raking for asphalt paving type projects. We also got the famous stay worker with his shovel. We've got hammer pounding. And again, all of these animations will go along with all of these pedestrian models. So when you multiply around 40 different animations with over 60 different models, there are thousands of different combinations of these. We've also got some of these types. Some of them are in place and some of them are not. Some of them are more useful in current configurations than others, and some of them we're still working on fixing. You can see here this one slides a little bit. We also got some crosswalk guards, which are useful for school scenarios, and then we've got some flagger types that are probably going to work better with our construction models. Similar is the low poly models. These are for use with maybe low poly vehicles, or you're trying to communicate a different aesthetic. Just a nice option. We don't have as many. We've got 7 different types, so you can choose the one that you want, and then you can choose from the same types of animations, again with the caveat that not all of these have been fully implemented. But you can see here the ones that do have a prop, they do have the full version of the prop. All right, so the next category is signals, and these are going to be extremely useful for communicating various types of transportation related projects. We've got some kind of more standard ones, and we've got some more unique styles here as well. I'll show both what's possible and also the limitations of these. So we'll start with these traffic signals, and there are a number of customization parameters here. So you can see here, intersection length, this one's not linked. We'll talk about that in just a second. You can also see which phase is the go phase. So we can go to cycle, and when it's on cycle, we can change the time. So if we wanted to be super fast, we could just make them all 0.1, or you could make it whatever you want it to be. You can also change the background color, and then you have control over the hanger type on some of these as well. For the second one, you can see we've got basically the same controls, though we've got a fourth option here, which is our arrow light. And in this scenario, we can't control it to make it flashing, but we do have that option here. For signal heads 3 and 4, same sort of idea, but on these ones we don't have the ability to control the color of the back, but we can control which phase it's on or if it's on cycle, and what those times are if it is on cycle. All right, this is something that we'll touch on again in the traffic video of this series, but we have the ability to create intersection controllers as part of the traffic. And when you do that, we can link this traffic signal to it to correctly represent which phase that traffic signal should be in. So let's say that we're going to create a traffic intersection. Let's make these signal times short. And this is intersection 1. So if we wanted to really quickly add some traffic paths, and we don't want those cars driving through each other, we can attach them to that intersection controller, turn on our stop bar visualizer, and we've got a really simple intersection controller. Then we need to put one on phase 1, one on phase 2. So now we've got this super simple intersection. We can go back to our signal head 1, and you can see here intersection link. We now have that option of intersection 1. So now we can put which phase is it on go. We've got option of phase 1 or phase 2, and so this is linked with phase 1. So if we go back here, you're going to say here it's phase 1 active. This is going to be go on phase 2. So as soon as this other path goes, you'll see that this traffic signal is going to change just like it did there. So it's a really cool thing. This is still in beta. It doesn't work for all of our traffic signals, but that option is available for some of them. All right, we'll next go to a few of the pedestrian options. We've got type 1, 2, and 3. And these have a lot of the same options as the traffic signals, but they do not yet have the ability to be linked to intersection controllers, at least at the time of the recording of this video. So if we go to the first one, you'll see here we've got a stop and a go, pretty simple. We can also cycle it, and we can control that. It's just 1 second like that. These other ones, they've got some fancier stuff. So you can see we've got cycle, and then we've got a timer here too. And we can adjust what the length of time that we want for that, anything from 1 second to 40 seconds. So if we just want that to be 10 seconds, we can adjust that just like this. And then the last type, just another kind of different style. It's got these countdown arrows, and you can adjust those as well. All right, and finally we've got just the actual circle and arrow. So let's put these in, and I'll show you what options we have. So let's say that we put our signal head in, and we want a flashing left turn. By default, it doesn't have that option. But what we can do is we can go here, and we can turn it to off. So now none of those are going to glow. And then now we can go to arrow light signal, and we can place that in here. Again, you're not going to be able to place it on here. Unfortunately, you have to place it below and then just manually move that into place like that. But now we've got a lot of control now that it's been placed. So we can choose which light type we have. So you can see here we've got the solid type or the dot type, but then we can control the color with a few handy presets here. And then we can do flash interval. So this is where we can get that flashing left turn. This is 0.1. Maybe we want that to be 0.5 by default. So now we've got our flashing left turn that we can use, especially if that's something that we're trying to communicate. And if you want to hide those selector icons, just go lock those assets. All right, continuing on, we've got a number of different types of signs. So these first 6 up here, these are actually MUTCD type signs. And so they're going to be used best when you know exactly what type of MUTCD signs you need. So let's say this, for example, this construction sign, from the drop down, you're just going to get the MUTCD names. So you need to know those for these to be most useful, because these don't have handy thumbnails. But when you look through all these, you're going to have dozens, if not hundreds, of options. So we've got the construction sign, we've got here the info sign, we've got the regulatory sign, the school, the UK sign, and the warning sign. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I highly recommend checking these out to see if they have the types of signs that you need for your project. And this way you don't have to manually model and import those through something like SketchUp, which traditionally has been the best method for these types of unique signs. And the UK signs especially are hopefully very useful for projects that aren't based in the United States. All right, the next category is street furniture. And when you first look at these, you may wonder what a fire hydrant has and what could be customized. But essentially these just have different colors. So if we want to place this fire hydrant, and by default the one that you use is not red, you can quickly make those changes using these presets, or using specific colors here as well. So the same is true for all of these other ones. So if we want a table, but we want it to be a specific type of color, and we just adjust the color as necessary. So feel free to check all those out. The next category, these ones are actually a lot of fun. We'll start with the arrow board, and these are very commonly used in construction here in the States. And let's change our time of day so you can better see what's going on. And essentially arrow boards quickly signal different lane changes or other construction elements. So if we want to go there to this template, we can edit that by just choosing which pattern we have. So it says light behavior, but we've got arrow left, arrow right, we've got flashing arrow, we've got multiple arrows left. The other type of traffic control is the DMS, dynamic message sign, either the panel or the version on the trailer. And they do the same thing. One of them is just mounted on a trailer. So you can see this one. This is something we could put on an overhead, and then the trailer version is something that is already mounted. So this one's really cool because we can customize the text here. So you can control the font, the justification, and so on, but we can actually type in the text. So you can see here this is too big, so we can control the font size. And then we have a few different options for font types. You can also control the emissive brightness and whether we want it to be yellow or orange or maybe some other color. And then the free panel does the exact same thing. Again, you can just mount it on something else. The last category is vehicles, and we have two types. We have the dynamic bus and we have the dynamic train. So let's create templates of each of these. And these ones, you'll see we can't drag them into our scene because they're actually kind of a special type of dynamic asset. So for train, let's do light rail. And then let's pause our traffic. So you can see here, this is this dynamic asset, but it's actually a different template. So we need to link this one, 1616, with this path. The way you do that is you go to the path that we just placed, light rail number 19. We go to our asset, search dynamic, and you'll see here it filters from our drop down. We could also have searched 1616 or train and found the same thing. So now let's push play again. This is our actual dynamic train that we can edit. Let's pause it. Now we can go back to our template and we can make adjustments here. So there are a lot of customization options here. And we're doing this so that hopefully you can get a good representation of whatever the rail is for wherever you're at. So the first thing we can adjust is the power car length, and this is the nose length. So we can do something sharper like a high-speed rail or something flatter. We can also do the number of passenger cars, and that will go all the way up to 10. We can also control things like the text. So if we wanted to say Boston, we could type that in. That's pretty cool. And then you can also import your own decal. So you'll see here I imported the Civil Engine logo here, and then we can adjust the scale and the offset and so on. So this just gives even more control to customize it. You can also control the decal rotation, offset, and so on. And then we have control over the colors. So if we wanted to make this, instead of yellow, we can make that white. We could also do the base side color. Maybe we want to make that gray. So you can see how you're able to fully customize this train for your project. And then we can also adjust the passenger fill, which isn't always possible to see. Sometimes you can see it through the windows, but right now it's at 100%. If we don't want a lot, we can just reduce that. And then you can also add electric equipment on the top as well. So if we push play, you're going to see that go along our track. All right, the same is true for bus. So before we do that, let's place a traffic path. But instead of all traffic, we want to change this to our dynamic bus. And those should usually come in at the bottom. So now we can pause this, and we can adjust these parameters. So if we go to our bus, you can see here we can control the, we have this decal on the side. We can control that. You can also do a custom sign. We've also got this text at the beginning. You can do the same thing with the passengers. And then we have control over the colors like we did for the train. So there's our super cool custom Civil Engine bus, and you can do the same with your own, and then it will go all along. We can also do an articulated bus, which is really neat as well. All right, so that's all the different dynamic asset categories. I did want to show one other cool trick that we have with dynamic assets, and that's the ability to save them and send them to other Civil Engine users. So we just customized that Civil Engine bus. Let's export that template now. So now this is called a BCA, which is a Beyond CAD asset. So let's call this Civil Engine bus. Save it as a .bca. Now let's open a brand new project in a blank scene. You'll see we don't have any dynamic templates here. So what we want to do is import a template file. We have Civil Engine bus, and now it shows up here. So if we do the same thing we did before, where we place a path, and then we want to change this to our own custom bus, just like that, we've got our Civil Engine bus here in this brand new project. So that BCA file, that's something that works with dynamic assets, and that's something that we're going to be expanding through Civil Engine in the future, where you'll be able to do custom path types and area types and so on. But for now, you can use it for dynamic assets. All right, so we're going to close out this video by talking about that third type of asset, which is imported assets. So I'm here in SketchUp. We've got this nice food truck that I found, and we want to get it into our scene in Civil Engine. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to make sure that this is centered at least closely to the point of origin. So we can do that because that's going to be your pivot point. So if you're far away from the point of origin, then you're going to have a lot of issues. So with something with tires, you want to make sure that that's on the ground, and it looks like we are pretty close. All right, and then as discussed in the import video, the best format for exporting out of SketchUp is typically an OBJ, though FBX is another option if you need to. All right, so we got about 54,000 phases on that. Now I'm back in Civil Engine, so we want to go to import, and there are two options here, base model and asset. For this one, we definitely want to choose asset. Again, the difference which I covered in the import video is a base model, that's kind of the ground that you place assets on. An imported asset is the asset that you would place on the base model. So just kind of important to understand the difference there. So we'll go to import new. So we found it. We want to make sure our units are centimeters. We can leave the rest of these defaults and we can go to finish import. All right, so now we have this as an asset in a list. So this is when you import a base model, it's going to try and place it right in the scene, whereas this asset, it didn't place anything. So what we need to do is click and drag, and now we can place it in our scene because it's attached to our cursor. We could also place more than one if we wanted to as well. And then when you select them, you're going to see the same information in the details panel as with other types of assets. We could scale, we could rotate, we could do everything else that we could do with the transform gizmo. I'm going to delete these extra two, and I'm also going to rotate my sun so that we can have a better idea of this. And this is kind of something that nice about these imported assets is you can adjust each of those textures. So we've got a number of textures in here. It's going to try and auto detect some of them like glass, but for the most part, you're going to need to assign these yourself. So for this one, we can check what it is, and then we can go down, and some of these, they're not going to be that important. And if you are working in SketchUp, you're going to want to do your best to identify which textures aren't necessary and get rid of those. But we're going to go through and try and find the ones that actually are important. All right, so this third one here, this is that menu. So if I go to import, or if I change it, you're going to see it goes to white. We don't want that. We want the actual texture that came in from SketchUp. So press the plus icon, and it's going to revert back to whatever the default texture was. So we can see here, we've got this counter right here, and we maybe want to make this a type of metal. So we can do that. And then I believe that first one we tried to do was one of these hamburgers. And so for these ones, we probably just want to leave the default texture because that's what it needs to be. And so we'll continue in through here. Again, I know this is tedious, but that's because we're not dealing with an optimized asset, which is often the case working with SketchUp files. So I'm going to go back to SketchUp, and I'm going to try and figure out what this main color is because that's what we're most interested in. So I'm using the picker tool, and you can see here it says iRender metal. So we need to find that name here in our list of materials. So you can see down here we have iRender metal. So that's going to be the one that is the side panel of the vehicle. We can make that. Let's try and find. You know what? This one probably could just be stylized shiny. All right, so now we've got that nice shiny color on the side. So this is a highly detailed list. You could go through and edit every single one, but that's the process of doing this. And let's say that we had something custom. So let's go back to the menu. So let's say we had our own custom menu here. We can actually replace it by clicking the replace button and changing it like that. And then we don't have a lot of controls currently to adjust that image, but you can do that for individual textures here. And you can also do that by clicking the import new button in addition to the replace button. So once you're done, you just want to click apply, and now those changes are going to be applied for that imported texture. So when you place another one, it's going to have those material changes. And if we go to make edits, it's going to make those edits for all of those imported assets. So if we go down to that color, the green color, and change that to blue, then it's going to change it on all of them. And as a note, sometimes changing the material color will take a while. It just takes a while to load that. So make all the changes, press apply, and you're good to go. All right, we talked about the BCA files for our dynamic assets. We also have that option here. So let's go and let's save this as food truck. We're going to call this food truck export. So what this is doing is it's taking that 3D model and it's taking the changes that we made to the material and it's saving it as our own proprietary file format that we can import into Civil Engine or even into future versions of Beyond Typicals and our other software. So let's open a new file. We'll do it here in empty slabs so that you can just see that this is a new file. Let's go to imports, import new, and we want to search down beyond CAD asset. So now we're going to go to food truck export, and now we have this, and it's the same that we had before with that change to blue. So that's a really cool way. You can see not only did it save the materials, but it saved also the texture that I applied. And then just as a reminder, every time you place these, they're going to show up in the hierarchy. So we can go here. You'll see it's food truck 1, food truck 1, food truck 1, and each of those have their own instance number identifier. So we got 5, 6, 7, and then we can take and organize these into a folder, and then from there we can turn them on and off. We can lock them to hide the selector icons, or we can delete them all together. So make sure to use imported assets as much as you need to fill out your civil engine scene and augment what we already have in our asset library.
Stories in every stream, the tales are told. Rivers mounts intertwined, a 3D world in time. Set off past in motion where engineering are aligned. Urban maps collide, visions lean by.
All right, thank you for joining me for this video. In the next video, we are going to go into depth on the path tool, which is a fundamental part of civil engine.
Chance of tomorrow, the journey never ends. We keep on moving forward where every line extends.